You think you're making your own decisions. You're not. Right now, in this moment, there is a version of you operating beneath your awareness. Pulling strings you can't see. Sabotaging goals you consciously want. Choosing people who hurt you. Reacting in ways you later can't explain. Carl Jung called it the shadow. And it has been running your life far longer than you realize. In 1912, Carl Jung broke from Sigmund Freud, the most powerful figure in psychology at the time. It cost him everything. His reputation. His friendships. His mental stability. For years after the split, Jung descended into what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period so dark he feared he was losing his mind. But what he discovered in that darkness became the most important map of the human psyche ever drawn. Jung found that every person carries two selves. The self you show the world, curated, controlled, socially acceptable. And the self you buried. The parts of you that were rejected, punished, or deemed unworthy by your parents, your culture, your own fear. He called the buried self the shadow. And here is what most people never understand about it. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It doesn't weaken when you deny it. It grows. It organizes. And then, quietly, systematically, it begins to make your decisions for you. Nietzsche saw the same truth from a different angle. He wrote that most people never become who they truly are, because they spend their entire lives running from the parts of themselves they were taught to be ashamed of. Machiavelli, the coldest observer of human nature who ever lived, understood the strategic consequence. A person who does not know their own weakness has already been defeated. They simply haven't received the news yet. What you are about to hear are 5 signs, 5 precise psychological signals, that your shadow has taken the wheel. Not as theory. As a diagnostic. A test. By the end of this video, you will know whether you are living your life, or whether your shadow is living it for you. And then, the part most psychology channels will never tell you, you will know exactly what to do about it. Stay until the end. The twist is the part that changes everything. Sign 1. You react to people with emotions that don't fit the situation. Jungian grounding, projection, collected works, Volume 9. Jung made an observation that sounds simple until you sit with it long enough to feel its full weight. Everything that irritates you about others is a doorway into understanding yourself. He called it projection. The psychological mechanism by which the shadow, those buried, unacknowledged parts of yourself, gets transferred onto the people around you. You don't see your own shadow directly. You see it wearing someone else's face. Here is how you know this is happening to you. Someone does something minor. A colleague takes credit in a meeting. A friend cancels plans. A stranger is arrogant in a conversation. And your reaction is disproportionate. Not mildly annoyed, viscerally disturbed. Something ignites in you that feels far larger than the situation warrants. That disproportionate reaction is a message. Not about them. About you. The things that trigger the most intense emotional responses in you are almost always the traits you have most aggressively suppressed in yourself. The person who becomes furious at arrogance has usually buried their own desire to be seen and acknowledged. The person who cannot tolerate weakness in others is terrified of the weakness they carry and refuse to name. The person who is obsessed with other people's dishonesty is often running from something they cannot be honest about in themselves. Jung documented this pattern across thousands of patients. The intensity of the reaction is directly proportional to the depth of the repression. Real-world example. Think about the most persistent irritation in your life right now. A person, a type of person, a behavior. Ask yourself, not what they're doing wrong, but what part of yourself that behavior might be mirroring. The answer, if you're honest, will be uncomfortable. That discomfort is your shadow knocking. Nietzsche called it ressentiment, the psychological phenomenon where repressed inner conflict transforms into outward judgment and blame. You cannot look directly at what is unacceptable inside yourself, so you look at it through other people and condemn it there. This is sign 1. And if you recognized yourself, stay with it. It means something important is close to the surface. The person who cannot see their shadow in the mirror looks for it in everyone else. And they always find it. Sign 2, you self-sabotage at the moment you're closest to what you want. Jungian grounding, the concept of the unconscious, Collected Works, Volume 7. You have been here before. Everything is aligned. The opportunity is real. The path is clear. And then, at the exact moment it should work, something in you pulls the pin. You procrastinate past the deadline. You start a conflict with the person supporting you. You make the decision that ends the possibility. You disappear. And afterward, you cannot fully explain why. Jung identified this pattern as one of the shadow's most sophisticated operations. He called it the unconscious counterwill, the part of you that has a goal running in direct opposition to your conscious desires. Here is the mechanism. Your conscious mind wants success, recognition, love, achievement. But your shadow, built from every rejection, punishment, and shame experience you've ever had, has drawn a different conclusion about what you deserve. If you were punished as a child for being too visible, too loud, too ambitious, your shadow learned that visibility is dangerous. Now, every time you approach genuine success, which requires being seen, the shadow activates and engineers an exit. It doesn't feel like self-sabotage from the inside. It feels like reason, like clarity, like suddenly seeing why this particular opportunity was wrong, why this relationship wasn't right, why now isn't the time. That is the shadow constructing a rational justification for an irrational fear. Machiavelli wrote in chapter 6 of The Prince that the most dangerous enemy of a rising power is not an external force, it is the internal instability that surfaces precisely when success becomes real. He was writing about principalities. Jung would tell you he was also describing the human psyche. Real-world example, consider the pattern across your own history. Not one instance, the pattern. Where do things tend to break down? At the beginning, when starting feels overwhelming. Or closer to the finish line, when completion would require you to be accountable for the result. Most self-saboteurs fail at the same stage, repeatedly. That consistency is not bad luck. It is a signature, the shadow's fingerprint on your timeline. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology confirms that unconscious self-concept, how we believe we deserve to be treated at a level below conscious awareness, is a stronger predictor of life outcomes than conscious goals or stated intentions. You can want something consciously and be running a program against it simultaneously. Your shadow doesn't fear failure. It fears the exposure that comes with success. And it will destroy your progress to protect you from that exposure, whether you asked it to or not. Sign 3, you play a role in every relationship that isn't entirely yours. Jungian grounding, persona and shadow, Collected Works, Volume 9a. Jung described the persona as the mask we wear in public, the curated version of ourselves we present to the world. Necessary. Normal. Every functional person has one. The problem begins when the mask fuses with the face. When you have spent so long performing a version of yourself, the strong one, the calm one, the selfless one, the agreeable one, the one who never needs anything, that you genuinely cannot locate where the performance ends and you begin. This is when the shadow takes over in relationships. Because everything you cannot express through the persona gets expressed through the shadow, sideways, indirectly, and usually destructively. The person who plays the endlessly agreeable role eventually explodes in cold rage over something trivial. The person who plays the always strong role eventually collapses in a way that confuses everyone around them. The person who performs selflessness eventually resents the very people they claim to want to help. This is not hypocrisy. It is hydraulics. The shadow is not destroyed by suppression, it is pressurized. And it will find a release point. Real-world example, think about the role you play in your closest relationships. The one everyone expects you to be. Now think about what you have never been allowed to be in that same relationship, what parts of you have never had permission to exist there. The gap between those two answers is the exact space your shadow occupies. It will express itself through that gap, in moments of inexplicable anger, withdrawal, jealousy, or behavior you later attribute to being not yourself. You were entirely yourself. You were your shadow self. Which is still you. Jung wrote that the most dangerous moment in a person's psychological life is when the persona is so thick that the shadow has no legitimate outlet whatsoever. At that point, the pressure builds until the release is catastrophic, to relationships, to health, to identity. Nietzsche saw the social dimension of this clearly. He wrote that the person who has never been allowed to be their full self becomes, over time, a pressure vessel with no valve. Their authenticity doesn't disappear. It mutates. Every role you play that isn't fully yours is a debt. And the shadow collects, with interest. Sign 4. You are drawn to the same types of people and situations that damage you. Jungian grounding, repetition compulsion and the unconscious, Collected Works, Volume 16. This is the sign that is most painful to acknowledge, because it requires you to accept that the pattern is not bad luck. You have been here before. A different person, a different context, but the same dynamic. The same feeling of being slowly diminished. The same erosion of your boundaries. The same moment where you realize, again, that you have ended up exactly where you swore you would never return. Jung identified this as one of the shadow's most powerful operations, the compulsion to recreate familiar psychological territory, even when that territory is painful, because the unconscious finds familiarity safer than the unknown. What this means in practice: if you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, your shadow learned that conditional love is what love feels like. Now, consciously, you want consistent, unconditional connection. But your shadow, operating below your awareness, will be attracted to exactly the people who reproduce that conditional dynamic. Not because you are broken. Because your shadow is trying to resolve something old by recreating the conditions of the original wound. This is the unconscious logic: if I can win this person's consistent approval, the one who withholds it the way the original wound withheld it, I will finally resolve what was never resolved. It doesn't work. The wound doesn't close by recreating the conditions of its creation. It only deepens. Machiavelli, in Chapter 3 of The Prince, wrote about the fatal error of returning to the same strategy after it has already failed, expecting different results from unchanged conditions. He was describing military campaigns. Jung would recognize it immediately as a description of unconscious relationship patterns. Real-world example: map your last 3 significant relationships or closest friendships. What was the central tension in each? What did each person make you feel at their worst? Now look for the thread. The thread is not their behavior, it is the specific emotional state they triggered in you. That emotional state, that particular flavor of pain or inadequacy, is the wound your shadow is trying to resolve by returning to it, again and again, dressed in different faces. You don't keep ending up in the same situations by accident. Your shadow is building the map and handing it to you as instinct. Sign 5, you feel a persistent, nameless sense that something is missing. Jungian grounding, individuation, collected works, Volume 9. This is the quietest sign. And the most devastating. Not depression. Not anxiety. Something underneath both, a low-frequency awareness that despite everything functioning, despite the relationships and the work and the daily motion of your life, something essential is absent. You cannot name it. That is not accidental. Jung called the process of psychological wholeness individuation, the lifelong integration of all parts of the self, including the shadow, into a coherent and authentic identity. He believed that the sense of incompleteness, the unnamed void that no external achievement, relationship, or circumstance ever quite fills, is precisely the feeling of a person who is living half of themselves. The half you buried. The ambition you were told was arrogance. The anger you were told was unacceptable. The tenderness you were told was weakness. The creativity you were told was impractical. The wildness you were told was dangerous. All of it, compressed into the shadow, removed from your daily experience, and leaving behind it an exact-shaped absence. That absence is what you feel. Nietzsche named it differently but precisely. He wrote that most people live as a faded version of themselves, not because life defeated them, but because they defeated themselves preemptively, surrendering the parts of their nature that the world found inconvenient. The success that doesn't satisfy. The relationship that is good but hollow. The achievement that arrives and immediately feels insufficient. These are not signs of ingratitude. They are signs of incompleteness. You are experiencing the victory of your persona, and simultaneously the hunger of your shadow for acknowledgement. Real-world example, think about a version of yourself you used to be, or always wanted to be, that you have slowly edited out of your life. A quality, a pursuit, an aspect of your personality that got smaller over time as you became more appropriate, more mature, more responsible. That edited out version is not gone. It is waiting in the shadow. And the void you feel is its exact dimensions. The life that feels almost right but not quite, that almost is the distance between your persona and your shadow. It is the distance between who you perform and who you are. Midpoint twist, what everyone else will tell you here. Here is where most psychology content will give you a list. Journaling prompts. Breathing exercises. Affirmations to recite. A step-by-step process for healing your shadow that sounds therapeutic and leaves you feeling temporarily better and fundamentally unchanged. Here is what Jung actually said, and almost nobody repeats it because it is not comfortable. The shadow cannot be healed. It can only be integrated. There is a profound difference. Healing implies that something is wrong with your shadow, that the anger, the desire, the ambition, the darkness is a wound to be closed. Integration means recognizing that every quality compressed into your shadow was not a defect, it was a survival decision. And that survival decision is now costing you more than the original threat ever did. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is the most honest part of you. It contains everything you were powerful enough to feel but not yet free enough to express. And here is the truth that Nietzsche, Jung, and Machiavelli all arrived at from different directions. The person who has integrated their shadow is the most dangerous person in any room. Not dangerous to others. Dangerous in the sense of being genuinely free. Unpredictable. Unmanipulable. Because they have nothing left to hide, and therefore nothing left to protect. The manipulator's primary tool is leveraging what you are ashamed of. The person with an integrated shadow has removed that leverage entirely. This is not psychology as therapy. This is psychology as power. The way out: 3 dark integration principles. Integration Principle 1. Name what you were never allowed to be. The shadow grows in namelessness. The moment you name a quality you have suppressed, not to perform it blindly, but to acknowledge its existence, you begin to reduce its unconscious power over you. Not, I am angry, but I have suppressed anger that has been running my decisions, and I am now choosing when and how it operates. The difference is ownership. The shadow controls you when it is unnamed. You control it when you have named it with precision. Jung called this making the unconscious conscious. He wrote that until you do this, what lives in your shadow will direct your life, and you will call it fate. It is not fate. It is unacknowledged self. Integration Principle 2. Reclaim the projection. The next time someone triggers a disproportionate reaction in you, do not manage the reaction. Investigate it. Ask, what quality in this person am I reacting to? Do I carry that quality in a form I have suppressed? This is not self-blame. It is intelligence gathering. Every projection is a map to a part of your shadow. And every part of your shadow you retrieve from projection is a piece of your own power returned to you. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who understands his own territory cannot be surprised by an enemy. Your interior territory is your most critical domain. Know it completely. Integration Principle 3. Give the shadow a legitimate channel. The shadow does not require destruction. It requires direction. The suppressed anger that erupts sideways in relationships can become precision and boundaries expressed directly. The buried ambition that sabotages your success can become the driving force of your most significant work when acknowledged and channeled consciously. The desire for power that you were taught to be ashamed of can become genuine authority when you stop performing its absence. Every quality in your shadow was originally a strength. It became dangerous only when it was compressed into the dark with no outlet. Give it an outlet. A chosen, conscious, directed outlet. And watch what happens to the energy that was previously spent on suppression. So outro is, the mindset shift. Here is what this video has been building toward. The 5 signs, the disproportionate reactions, the self-sabotage, the roles you play, the patterns you repeat, the nameless void, are not signs of damage. They are signs of completeness. They are the parts of you that refuse to disappear even when you tried to erase them. They have been preserving themselves in the only way available to them, through the behaviors and patterns that confuse and frustrate you most about yourself. Your shadow is not evidence that something went wrong with you. It is evidence that you were too large to be entirely contained by what the world was willing to accept. Jung spent the final decades of his life writing about individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not perfect. Not healed. Whole. The integration of every part of yourself, light and dark, acceptable and unacceptable, persona and shadow, into a person who no longer needs to pretend. Nietzsche called it becoming who you are. Machiavelli, in the coldest, most strategic terms, would call it the only position from which you cannot be defeated. Because the person who knows their own shadow completely has removed every lever that the world uses to control the unaware. You cannot manipulate someone who has nothing to hide. You cannot destabilize someone who has already faced their own darkness. You cannot drain someone who has integrated the very thing you were going to use against them. That is not psychology. That is power. And it begins, not with a technique, not with a program, not with a list of affirmations, but with the decision to stop running from the part of yourself that has been chasing you your entire life. Turn around. Look at it. That is your correction. If you made it here, you already know something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Most people will watch a video like this, feel something shift, and then close the tab and return to the performance. You're still here. That means something about who you are. The next video will take you further into the territory that most people are too comfortable to enter. That's where you'll find us.